let's go over the new uniform guidance. So why the change? Well, the Office of Management, the Management Bureau thought that there needed to be a more streamlined documentation and process of the single audit requirements that will allow you to be more efficient, effective, and have a more transparent outlook with your single audit. And so with that, they teamed up with COFAR, which is the Council on Financial Assistance Reform, and thus they came up with the new uniform guidance. So here we've provided a link where you can pull up. Obviously you can't click on the PDF, but let us know if you want us to provide you a link, we can do that. But the official title here is the Title 2 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Subtitle A, Chapter 2, Part 200, but for our purposes we'll call it the Uniform Guidance. And I also, like Cody, tend to talk really fast. So if I kind of speed things up, just let me know, and then I will slow it down. So the uniform guidance is divided into subparts. The first is the acronyms and definitions, but then you'll notice down where it's subpart D, E, and F, it's starred in front, and these are really what probably pertains to you and what's very important and where the changes lie. So we'll go back into the uniform guidance in just a second. The 2016 compliance supplement. Like I mentioned before, the compliance supplement is something that us auditors use in order to guide our way through your single audit. But we've always suggested that this will also be a good tool for the auditees to use, because it also outlines what needs to be done on your end. So therefore, what is the goal of a single audit? To come up with an unmodified clean opinion with no reporting. This is just another tool for you to use. So we were told that the supplement was going to come out in late June. It is now mid-July. It has not been finalized. We will let you know when it has, but we always like to emphasize that you should use the correct supplement for the correct fiscal year. As of right now, I think, yeah, hopefully pretty soon that they'll come out with it. We don't have an ETA on that. We apologize. You can also access this compliance supplement on the White House website. So how do you use the compliance supplement? Well, it's divided into parts, which is very easy for the user to go through. The first thing is to know your CFDA number. It's the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance number, and so that helps you kind of navigate through the compliance. And I apologize, it's not in order, but Part 5 talks about the cluster programs. And for those that are not familiar with cluster programs, they are federal programs that are similar in nature in terms of the requirement. Example I'd like to give out that you guys may be familiar with is the Department of Transportation CFDA 20.500, which is the Federal Transit, the Capital Investment Grants. So sometimes you'll get that program, award that program, but also 20.507, which is the formula grants. And so those are considered to be a cluster program. They may have similar compliance requirements in nature. So we test that as one program. Part 2 is the matrix of compliance requirements. So what that does, each individual program has its own compliance requirements. It could be activities allowed. It could be the period of performance, eligibility. CDBG has an eligibility requirement, but maybe DOT or the 20.500, just as an example, may not have it. Part 3 is a compliance requirement. It's a little bit of an umbrella that outlines what's required for your single audit. And then breaking it down in Part 4 is specific to your program. So part 3 is important. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, part 3 is important because it's broken up into 2 pieces. It's 3.1 and 3.2. Why it's broken out, it helps you determine how to audit your grant. 3.1 are for grants that whose prime award date, and we'll go over what the prime award date means, for anything that's before December 26, 2014. So keep that date in mind. That is very important. 3.2 goes over all of the new requirements under the uniform guidance for any grants that were awarded on or after the December 26, 2014 date, and then also funding increments. And then we have a tip here: as an auditee, utilizing the compliance supplement as a whole can help you obtain a goal of unqualified report and with no findings on compliance. That's what we're all trying to achieve here. And here's just an example of what it looks like. Again, the compliance supplement for 2016 will come out, but we don't foresee that there are going to be much change to this section. And I apologize if you can't really read it for those of you in the back. And here's just the breakdown of part 4. We didn't include all of the compliance requirements here, but this is basically like the meat of what we look at as auditors. And then for you as auditees, that should also be a good go-to. And then use your CFDA number to do your research. So I talked about the December 26, 2014 date. So then your next question is, which one do I use? Well, just to let you know, the old rules or the old OMB consisted of 8 circulars that now are now streamlined into the new uniform guidance. A133 discussed the audits of state and local governments. You guys are the local governments. A87 was the cost principles for local governments, so that outlined your requirements. But now, in order to kind of get rid of all of the redundancies and any duplicative information and requirements, the uniform guidance was now just kind of pulls all of this into one document and gets rid of any inconsistencies or any redundancies. So which one do you use? You want to look at your grant date, and what you want to look at is the prime award date. The prime award date is the date in which you received your grant from the federal agency. It's anything before the December 26, 2014, that's going to fall under your old OMB. So you then take a look at 3.1 to see what is required. Anything after that is the new uniform guidance. So what if you received a grant as a subrecipient? Which day do you use? You want to use that prime award date where the federal government awarded that initial grant. Okay. So the new single audit threshold. So we're all aware that, hopefully, we're all aware that the new single audit threshold is down 750,000. It used to be 500,000. So starting fiscal year 2016, and some of you who have a calendar year end, this will be your new threshold. So if you have federal expenditures less than the 750,000, you're not required to have a single audit performed, but please have all of your records just maintained, because the federal agency may request to see some of that, but anything over that, you're required to have a single audit done. Type A and B threshold. And kind of just side note, whenever you see this 200.518 or 200 and numbers, that's where we're referencing to the uniform guidance. So it's helpful. It's a helpful tool. So once you pull that and have any questions to see, let's say what are the A and B thresholds, that's where you can look at it. Let's see, type A and B programs. Sometimes our clients ask us, well, how do you determine which program to test? This is just how, this is part of it. So type A program is any program that when you spend over $750,000 in expenditures. And so depending on whether or not it's a high or low risk, meaning did you have any findings last year, did you, that determines whether it's high or low. So any type A, we have to audit that program. Low type B, we just document as such on our end. We document as such. So this is just a helpful tool for you to kind of predict, okay, well, I think this is a program that we probably need to test. Type B, we as auditors audit high type Bs depending on how many low As. It's not something that you need to worry about, but then just to kind of give you a general idea. So a type B threshold is 25% of your type A, or at least 187,500. So that's the 25% calculation. And you may also wonder, well, how many programs do we determine an auditors to test, like how percentage of your CFA? For this, the new change now for low risk auditees, meaning have you filed your report timely? That's just a factor. A low-risk auditee, we as auditors test 20% of your CFA. For high-risk auditees, we test 40% of your CFA. So that changed. It used to be 25% and 50%. Just moving on to indirect costs. So the indirect cost is basically it's an overall allowance to reduce the administrative burden. So what the update has allowed for is this new, if you look at the second bullet point, is the de minimis rate of 10% of the modified total direct costs. So what that means is, if you have not negotiated an indirect rate for your federal programs, you can now elect to charge 10% of what the MTDC. So we have a calculation. It's not as complicated as the GASB 68 math that we did earlier, so we'll go over that. But if you have negotiated your rate, you can actually use that one-time extension for up to 4 years to just lock in that indirect cost rate. So the modified total direct cost consists of a couple of numerous components, and I just listed some of the bullet points here. Direct salaries, materials and supplies. And then your subawards for the first $25,000 of the award. What it doesn't include are any of the equipment, capital expenditures, and anything in excess of the $25,000 in the subaward and other components here. So let's kind of put that into some practical use. So here we have a calculation of how you can determine how much of your of the MTDC you can charge if you haven't already negotiated a indirect cost rate. So above you'll have your direct costs of your salaries, your supplies, your subcontract, and your capital equipment, and so you'll get your total direct cost. But below, let's exclude anything that is not allowed. Your capital equipment and then your subcontract in excess of the 25. So below here, we have a balance or an amount of $125,000. So what you'll do, you'll apply the 10%, which then would be $12,500, and that would be the indirect cost rate that you'll charge, if you so choose, for your reimbursement request. So I know it's a lot, but any questions up till now? So another main change in the uniform guidance is what is allowed when you request for reimbursements when it comes to the compensation and the salary. First and foremost, you are no longer allowed to request for budgeted estimates. You can in the beginning, But in the end, when the project is over, when the program is done, then you need to true up to your actual salaries that were charged to the grant. So anything, so the time and distribution records is anything from the employees that are paid in whole or in part of the federal funds, or anything that's used to meet the cost requirements. Going back, maintaining documentation is very important. That was emphasized in the webinar that Mark and I listened to. So you have to at least make sure that you include all of the timesheets, any records that are, well, in general, that you have for your grant, so that if they were to ask, you have that readily available. And also, we may ask to see it as auditors. How long do they say that they keep it? So the question is, how long are they required to keep the records? I think it's just standard 7 years.
Yep, it's usually up till the close out of projects, but for financial, for auditor purposes, when we looked at it, I think it depends on federal agency to federal agency who your grantor is. So, the point that Nikki emphasized, and AICPA and JQC, they emphasized that I think in the past, what happened was that there were auditors that they based it on budget. So, but now they say that you can base it on budget, but you need to do a true up. So what we've been advised our clients is that if you are going to base it on budget and file for your reimbursement, but the federal regulations require you to true up, you might as well just use actual when you file for reimbursements, because that's the easiest way. That's the easiest way to maintain documentation for for your internal control, to satisfy your auditors and satisfy your federal agency monitoring visit. Any other questions?
So for the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, or what we all like to call CFA, this is actually the responsibility of our clients, of the auditees. But as a firm, we do like to help and assist. I mean, our motto is to help you succeed. There are required components when it comes to reporting your federal expenditures on your CFA. I'd like to kind of go down to this second check mark. Are all programs identified by the CFDA number? A lot of the grants that in my experience that I've seen, have the appropriate CFDA number, but maybe not the appropriate program name. So I've provided this website, cfda.gov. What you can do, you can utilize this website, put in the CFDA number, and it actually it tells you what's the correct program name. A lot of times I think I've seen where it was the project name that was on the CFA, which is fine, but we do also need to include the correct program name. Another component is your program director indirect. Is it a cluster program? So those are just some of the components. There is a aesthetic or a change to how you present your CFA. So the new requirement is you have to have an additional column that allows for the expenditures to subrecipients. So if you have awarded money to subrecipients, I think it used to be maybe we have like a footnote in the report, but now it has to be on the face of the CFA. It's just a quick change.
I just want to emphasize that with the subrecipient amount in that column, it's just May style. So May style, we are going to insist that our clients use that format where subrecipient are included on a CFA. So the actual rule says that you have to include the amount of the sub award on the CFA itself. It can be any form, but that's the example that is provided by AICPA, and we are going to follow that example. you have the option, but I think the easiest way would be just provide a lump sum. Yeah. So. Sorry. I'll repeat the question. The question was, if we have a program that has a CDBG program and we have like 10 or 20 subrecipients, do we provide the details on a CIFA, or is it just a lump sum? So my answer is it's optional, but the easiest way would be just provide a lump sum.
Internal control. I want to thank Don for now introducing the whole concept of internal control for the cybersecurity, and so now we can easily transition it to the single audit. A lot of, I guess as clients, we don't really think about the internal control when it comes to single audit. Really, that's probably, as auditors, our jobs. But the uniform guidance now has placed, again, an emphasis that you as the auditee should implement and document your internal control process, thought process, and have that document, put that in your records. So let's talk about that. So stealing from Don's slide, there's the determine your objectives, you're assessing the risk of that particular program, you're applying any of the internal controls and assessing them, and then you want to monitor the results. And then ideally you want to have a low risk of non-compliance at the end of your assessment. So again, the emphasis is that as clients, you are not responsible for assessing the internal controls of your single audit. So just a couple of examples where you can document this. Are your transactions properly recorded and accounted for? Are they executed in compliance with the state and regulations? And just for example, if you used your federal funds to purchase, let's just say a fire truck, is that fire truck safeguarded from loss or theft? Also, segregation of duties. An example I'd like to give out is someone who is reviewing for expenditures for allowability, also requesting for filing for the reimbursement. But is there someone else that's also reviewing that? Is there proper monitoring and reporting? And if there are any instances of non-compliance, are you addressing them, and how? What's the turnaround time? Are you addressing them very quickly? And then when all of this is assessed, documentation. This is there any questions in regards to the internal control? Okay. Subrecipient monitoring. This was talked about a great deal in the update. This was actually a separate class, so we'll go over subrecipient monitoring and how you as the auditees are responsible for this. So if you award federal funds to a subrecipient, of course you are now considered the pass-through entity, or PTE. So in turn, you are now responsible to monitor and manage that fund, that program, and your subrecipients. And then doing so, documentation is very key. And also, we talked about providing or doing an having internal controls in place. But now, as a as a pass-through entity, you are now required to do a risk assessment of your subrecipients. And so what does that mean? You have to evaluate whether there is the risk of non-compliance with your subrecipients. And here I kind of gave you a couple of instances to use as a checklist when you do your risk assessments. Are the subrecipients experienced with this? Are they experienced with the same or similar subaward? Have they had any issues in their previous single audits? So an example I'd like to give out is, what if the city of Disneyland, we're as a firm, we're obsessed with Disneyland, provides $750,000 expenditures to a housing nonprofit. Well, this housing nonprofit has only dealt with federal funds. They've always had a single audit that showed an unmodified opinion and has no findings. And so how would we assess the risk of noncompliance? In this instance, probably a low. So when you do these assessments of your subrecipients, it's good to document that and keep that with their file. And as the PTE, it is your responsibility to monitor whether or not they're spending or the funds that were awarded to them appropriately. This could be done by monitoring visits. This could be done by asking for additional reports. So in reviewing, so as the PTE reports are very necessary to review in order to determine whether or not your subrecipient is complying with the subaward. So, and then following up for any discrepancies that you may find, and then if you do find a discrepancy, have they been addressing it timely? Do you need to maybe change the requirements that are in the subaward? Those are just something that, those are just some of the things that you might want to consider. So then you've assessed the risk of non-compliance. If there is, an example is if they are not, if they have, what am I trying to say? If they have spent your funds inappropriately, have you as the PTE addressed it, and then what do you do next? Do you limit the federal, do you limit their grant award moving forward? Do you cease it? Do you have an additional monitoring site scheduled? So here is just, we're going to talk about what is now required when you do issue some subawards to your subrecipients. There are components of your subaward that is required. Here's just a few of them. And I want to go on to the next slide and show you that we talked about indirect costs. Now having the indirect cost in your subaward is not required. What if you've already, we're kind of in the middle or at the end of the fiscal year, and you've already awarded your grant monies to subrecipients, and some of these components you haven't included. What do you do now? Our suggestion is to go ahead and just send them an addendum. Send whatever is missing from your original subaward, so at least you cover your base, you're in compliance with the new requirements. And here's just a couple additional bullet points to when you're issuing your subawards. Any questions in regards to that? Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
So this subrecipient risk assessment, is this coming with CFR 200 or is going to be applied on all grants?
This is the new requirement under the uniform guidance.
Subrecipients from the older grants, that was mandated before.
The risk, so the question is, are the new subrecipient, the subrecipient requirements only under the CFR 200 or the new uniform guidance?
Okay. So the subrecipient monitoring, all these new requirements under uniform guidance, they are not new. So, but the federal agencies has passed through that message to AICPA and down to all the auditors that they are emphasizing on subrecipient monitoring going on forward. So, so basically, they are new requirements, but they are not new. Those, if you look at the old OMBs, they are very similar. However, there's a lot more emphasis now. So, so one thing I want to mention is that if you go into this into the uniform guidance, there are if you look through, it's almost like a checklist itself. So what they have clarified is that if you come across the requirements, if it's a must, then you're required to have it. If it is a should, then it's a best practice. So when you're doing your subrecipient monitoring, or when you are doing your follow-up after. Okay, so first you have to do your, so basically there are three things that you need to cover. You need to do a risk assessment. After you've done your risk assessment, then you have to, there's your management decision on what you are going to do with your, as a result of the risk assessment. And then lastly is the new sub-award requirement. So those are the three things that that they emphasize. And so it's all in it's all in your program. I think we provided a reference number in there, but however in the slides I think we kind of put it in bullet point, and you can use that as a checklist. So I know we are trying to be helpful, so that way I think it's a lot easier for you. So yes.
So getting down to the report, if some of the subrecipient requirements are not in the agreements, do you expect that to be in writing in our single audit report or not?
I think that, sorry, the question is if some of the new sub-award requirements are not in the agreement that you currently have now, will that be a single audit finding or not? So I think it depends on, okay, so there is a little bit of auditor professional judgment there. And so having said that, look at the if your sub-award agreement is fall under uniform guidance, so then you should follow it a little. I will follow it. So, and things like if there's a CFDA number, the federal amount of the award. Those, I think, at least for us as auditors, we look at those basic ones that there's a few of the basic requirements that we deem to be essential. So, does that answer your question? Because if you look at requirements, there's like 15 or 20 requirements in there. So so is that a question? Okay, the question is, the DOT, there's a federal DOT award that is before 12/26/2014. Does it fall for the sub-award, does it fall under this requirement? It falls under the old OMB, but the old OMB has very similar requirements.
So it's more emphasized with this new uniform guidance. So if there are components that are missing, I mean, our best suggestion would be to go ahead and issue an amendment, addendum to the subawards.
Correct.
So at least you cover your base that way.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a new requirement. I apologize. I'll backtrack on that. It's not a new requirement, but there has been a great emphasis on the responsibilities as far as you as the pass-through entity, where you need to at least the documentation of what is being awarded and the transparency of it, in order for just to make everything clear.
Yeah, and our suggestion is for those, just coming back to the question, so our suggestion is that, sometimes contract amendment takes takes a while. So even an email to the subrecipient to say, well, now that we have this new uniform guidance, these are the additional information that we want to provide you, and those information under the new uniform guidance for the sub award, it's not that complicated. It's a little bit tedious, but once you first year, if you put all the bullet point in the Excel as a checklist, going on forward, every sub award, if you just go through now the checklist, that should help a lot.
So procurement standards. So the change. Just quickly going over the new procurement standards. So the federal entities must use its own documented procurement procedures in order to maintain the oversight and to ensure that the contractors that are awarded these, that you're using the federal grants to, are in accordance with the contract or your PO. So the new uniform guidance has now placed, again, a greater emphasis on the standards that are being in place. The good part is that you don't need to necessarily you don't have to implement. You get a 2-year grace period implementing the procurement standards we'll go over in the next slide. So you have until June 30th, 2018. And here are the 5 procurement methods. So the uniform guidance now states that you must use one of these methods. A question that was asked of us, I think, in a webinar that we did a while back is, do we need to adopt the same procurement method in regards to the federal awards and the single audit as our city's procurement procedures and policies? What we suggested is do what's best and what fits for your city. And then here, just the other, here's the sealed bids, competitive proposals, and then sole source. So your single audit report and what are your responsibilities as auditees. So we mentioned the CIFA is the auditee's responsibilities, but of course, us as MAs and with our clients, we like to assist in helping you with how to present your CIFA, but ultimately it's the management's responsibility. In regards to your report, if there were any prior year findings, that needs to be included in the report, and your corrective plans and your responses to those findings. So if you recall how your single audit report looks like, we do have the contact name, your corrective action plan included in your report. But what is new with this, the update is now you have to include an anticipated completion date. So that's going to be a new addition to your report. So you have findings. So what do? You want to ensure that they've been addressed and immediately identified. Maybe discuss with your program manager how you can rectify the situation and move forward. You want to provide timely responses that are addressing your findings and make sure that those what you've been addressed have been implemented. And then, of course, if you go back to the previous slide, when the anticipated date of when the correction will be implemented. So, any questions with the reporting side? So part of your single audit also is providing a report to the State Controller's Office. And there are different tiers, I should say, of when you are or are not required to file with the State Controller's Office. So if you have any expenditures less than the $750,000 threshold, you can submit a letter saying that you're exempt from filing one. If alternatively, if you have more but doesn't include, if you have more, if you've expended more than the 750,000 threshold, then, but doesn't include any of the state pass-through funds. If you didn't receive any state grants that were passed through from the feds, if you did not receive any federal funds that were passed through from the state, then you can either submit your audit report or an explanation letter saying that, yes, our single audit exceeds the $750,000 threshold. However, the grants that we received were not passed through from the state. And we can provide a template letter for you if that is actually the case that you're in, and then here's just kind of an example. So for those that do require a single audit and you do have state pass-through monies from the state, what is required of you when you submit your report to the State Controller's Office? Your single audit report, your financial report, your CAFR, your BFS, and the management letter. Sometimes it's all in one report. I've seen cities that include that. It's just one big document, but these are the reports that you have to submit to the state. Any questions? I'm sorry? Who's responsible to submit the reports?
The auditing. The auditee. So the responsibility to send in the reporting package is ultimately the auditee. So that will be the city.
Thank you.